And so, as you saw in the shorter video, and as is predictable, face appears. What's going on? We got our fast and light attempt to explain all this stuff, and I have yet to ever see them say stuff the way that it actually is, because there's a lot of... Let's just get into it.
Our galaxy is over 100,000 light years across, a distance so vast that it defies ordinary understanding. Even humanity's earliest radio transmissions, hurtling through space at the speed of light, would still only have washed over less than 1/1,000,000th of the stellar population. The cosmic speed limit, the speed of light, is so diminutive compared to our galaxy that any aspirations we might harbor for galactic exploration or even just communication seem impossible, at least within human lifetimes. But humanity has long wondered, could there be a cheat code? Could there be a way to exceed that cosmic speed limit? Could we go faster than light? ftL. There is no other technology that I so keenly wished could be realized than ftL. Since childhood, I've looked up at the stars and dreamt of one day reaching them, of exploring the ocean of space, the zoo of worlds, the menagerie of life. It almost seems like a cruel cosmic joke that the universe be arranged in such a way that we are able to look out and glimpse its wonders, and yet are trapped here by the speed of light, fated to only ever peer through the bars of our cosmic prison and dream. And so, it's no surprise that human ingenuity and aspiration has raged against Einstein's cosmic speed limit. After all, we've never been so good at doing what we're told. To be clear though, we currently have no way of building or even conceiving of a practical ftL system, be it for travel or just for communication. But there are threads that physicists pull at that it is hoped one day might bear fruit. For example, we know that Einstein's speed limit only truly applies to travel through space, but that space itself has no such constraint. For this reason, there are parts of the universe receding away from us faster than the speed of light, as the
That's not true. Full stop. The rate of an object moving away from you, like an accordion, accelerates at the same rate per measurement, but this two fingers only separated by this much, but the whole separated by that times 4. Okay? Now change that and turn it into megaparsecs, and then you end up understanding that, yeah, other stuff is moving away at a speed that is 1 regular, but because of its multiples of a distance, there is a multiples amount of that regular expansion, and everything else further away is moving away even further and faster not faster, just more multiples of the same speed distance away, as if everything helps everything else stretch and move away. This is why nothing actually is going faster than light as you go further and further away. That's just ridiculous. But also, simply doing the math of the amount of distance over time, just negating the fact that we have a further amount of distance into the past that we are looking at when we look further into the distance, because it takes a while for light to get to us. Clearly, something that is 1,000 light years away, 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 light years away is 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, and 1,000,000,000 years in the past. Because if light is constant, then it takes a certain amount of exact time for it to get to us. So there's things like the idea of time dilation, and if that existed, then all these measurements that we assume are correct are actually vastly, unpredictably incorrect, and it could be that we're seeing something that isn't 13 billion light years in the past and away, but we're seeing something that is, despite the fact that, of course, it has been moving for 13 billion years, it's also that the light may or may not have to take all that time because of different lensing and whatever else factors. Stuff that would equal into multiples of time dilation effects. But again, no.
The fabric of the cosmos itself expands in all directions. Could we one day learn to manipulate space then and somehow use this to travel faster than light? The hypothetical Alcubierre drive is perhaps the most famous example of this concept. Inspired by Star Trek's warp drive, Miguel Alcubierre showed that there exists a solution within Einstein's relativistic field equations that, in principle, could allow ftL. By expanding space behind itself and contracting it ahead, a bubble.
Imagine that you hold the ship in a bubble, send a infinitesimally small laser beam in front of you, and travel along that laser beam like a zipper. And that is the Alcubierre drive. You're still distorting space, and everything is supposedly still moving towards you, but according to the theory, you are moving space so that the space you occupy is the thing that is moving. So you won't even experience inertia. This is nonsense. Yes, it's like working with a frickin' I don't know. I actually lost my train of thought. The point is that moving the bubble, the area of space-time that is actually inertially still, relative to most things, that bubble that moves is still going to pass through space that is being warped to stretch and around it, and that requires a displacement field and the hope that stuff can move physically away faster than light. And that's just ridiculous. You're not going to shove things out of the way faster than light as much as you would like to, as much as it seems like it'd be great on paper and it makes sort of sense in simulation. It doesn't make any physical sense.
Of space could cruise between the stars at arbitrarily fast speeds. The idea has...
I hate to be a wet blanket and say that ship will never fly. It will never warp space the way that they are talking about. However, there's ways of warping the supposed smallest amount of the fabric of space-time. In other words, what I always refer back to what I considered the electromagnetic field itself. And yeah, you can move it around. You have a magnet, you can move that around easy, whatever else. Fabric of space-time is not moving that way. Space-time doesn't curve to begin with. The space-time curvature nonsense refers to things along the lines of time dilation theory. And again, having a big theory of the space-time curvature, which is just a result of another theory, then you have to really check the validity. You're doubling down on the amount of sure you have to be of these ideas. You have to make sure that it is fact before you can say, yeah, this is a thing. And of course, it's irrelevant unless you actually build the damn thing and attempt to move ftL. Because I'll tell you one thing, I'm sorry, I really would like it if I could say that the field drive could work, and before I learned how physics actually works, my brain was really happy about ftL, and then I stopped feeling that way because it became... Well, okay, look. I'm a proponent that we should be able to technically move faster than the speed of light. We're just not going to be bending space-time to do it. We're instead going to have something like a black hole in front of us, and that will be absorbing all the stuff that goes in front of the ship, hopefully not shredding right through the black hole and hitting us, which is still a possibility. Bigger black hole?
Certainly faced many challenges though, such as requiring the use of exotic matter, enormous energy requirements, and even a...
Electromagnetism can do it, or matter that has apparently the idea of negative mass. The whole idea is in order to warp space-time, the theory is that it happens on the scale of a planet. So, yeah, you might be able to do it with something smaller, but you're not gonna without, like, extreme densities. There's only certain densities that you can reach without using, like, certain energies or whatever else. the theory is like, okay, yeah, you can go on to the extremes of science and maybe, hopefully, eventually, if it's even possible to design this thing to make it possible to go faster than light. And, uh,
Literating the destination through the buildup of radiation gathered up by the bubble. Yet, optimists might argue that none of these are truly showstoppers, merely engineering challenges. A more pressing problem is folding in quantum effects into the Alcubierre drive. In 2009, Finazzi et al. Showed that the warp drive bubble leads to exponentially increasing Hawking radiation on the inside of it. This isn't just a hazard to the crew, the exponential buildup destabilizes the bubble itself. It's important to remember that we don't have a good theory of quantum gravity yet, and the Alcubierre drive is conceived in its absence, just using...
I mean, it took a while, I got there, but quantum gravity is about, again, the electromagnetic field, which is not just, or I should say, I don't know how to put it, but it's the field that is the connection between electrons and protons. If you call that electromagnetic field, okay. But the fact is that that thing is everywhere. So because it is everywhere, anything that is mass is able to move along with it. And it moves with mass. We already know what dark matter is. It's the EM field. The problem is we're too stuck on, like, certain measurements of how we expect the electromagnetic field works because of how it works in regards to its interaction with electrons. But the EM field is not electrons. The waves that go through the EM field are not electron-based. Veritasium did a study on how electricity goes through wires, and again, it's a wave that goes through the EM field and is sent along the wires. The electrons themselves don't even move much at all. They only excite the EM field, and that makes the wave propagate along the wire and down and very far away. Which is crazy, it's amazing, it's great. So, again, once you realize that the EM field is a fluid, then you'll actually be able to understand a couple other things. When you talk about things for tens of hours, it can be hard to... Also, if it's late. When you understand that the EM field is a fluid, electromagnetism affects everything. Protons, neutrons are affected by it by technically by the interaction protons have with each other. Which you would think if protons are fully positive, then they would have some effect against each other. Protons aren't as simple as just positive. Electrons are not as simple as just negative. It's a flow. Electrons are actually tiny bar magnets, like any other magnet. They flow the electromagnetic field through them, around, and through them again. Protons do differently. And it's just a flow of that energy. And the protons are more like it wants to pull things in. It's what we call positivity. It's different. I don't know how. It's hard to explain.
General relativity alone. These kinds of quantum concerns don't just plague warp drives. Wormholes, another hypothetical ftL system, has also been criticized as being possibly unstable due to these quantum effects ignored by general relativity. Ultimately, we can't.
Quantum effects are not ignored by general relativity. Tell that to a gravitational wave.
Can't truly prove whether wormholes or Alcubierre drives are allowed or not until we have solved quantum gravity or built a working example of one. The other problem with assessing the feasibility of ftL is that there are multiple ideas out there, such as tachyons, Krasnikov tubes, quantum tunneling, and entanglement. And each one of those.
Okay, don't tell me about entanglement, because it doesn't exist. The true terminology of entanglement has to do with, oh, we split something and there's a correlation. There is no interaction. There is no actual cause that you can do to particle A that'll do anything to particle B. That's not been proven. It's never occurred. The Nobel Prize needs to be revoked from the people who said it happened. It was never observed. There is a causation. No, there is just a correlation. I always refer to it as splitting a baseball in half. Yeah, on one side you're going to see the first half of the baseball, on the other side you're going to see the second half of the baseball, and yeah, one of them is right-handed and the other is left-handed. So whenever you see the one going up, you see the other one going down. But again, if you flip it 180 degrees so that they're both facing the same way, they're actually both going up.
There's a diverse number of flavors proposed. For example, the Alcubierre metric has been tweaked many times to reduce the energy requirements in various ways. And of course, physicists still surely will continue to conjure up new varieties in the future. As a result, it seems somewhat hopeless that we'll ever be able to completely exclude ftL as a possibility. On the one hand, our hearts might rejoice in that because it means that hope persists and the dream will always be alive.
Unless you use real science and measurements, observations, and the scientific method.
But on the other hand, our minds complain because, after all, this is science, and we want definitive, clear, objective answers, not eternal maybes that will forever be unfalsifiable. So, is there anything that we can definitively say with existing knowledge? Well, it turns out, yes. Despite the fact that we don't have a theory of quantum gravity, despite the fact that there are countless variants and ideas about ftL systems, there is a definitive statement that we can make about all ftL systems. They all allow for causality breaking time travel. When you hear that...
Yeah, that's... I'll just let him make his statement first.
ftL implies time travel, you might think about sci-fi portrayals of accelerating past the speed of light. But actually, the causality breaking is far more subtle and occurs even with ftL messaging systems alone. The explanation is a little challenging, so we're going to break it down into small, bite-sized steps and use diagrams to help us understand it. It's worth spending a little bit of time on this because the consequences are truly profound. Let's start by drawing a line representing one dimension of space along the bottom of the screen and a line representing time that's orthogonal to that. We now have a space-time or Minkowski diagram. To get acquainted with this setup, let's consider a distant star like Vega. This green square represents Vega at a certain point in space, in other words, its location, but also at a certain point in time. Let's consider that Vega is stationary in this frame of reference, so that as we move through time, it traces out this line. Note how it has the same position at all times. This line is what we would call the world line for Vega. And we don't have to limit ourselves to just Vega. We can, for example, put the Earth on the space-time diagram as well. Earth isn't moving much compared to Vega, so let's just assume it's also stationary in this frame and thus has a parallel world line. Since we're ultimately interested in speed when it comes to ftL, let's now familiarize ourselves with what speed looks like on this diagram. Because we're working in the Earth's rest frame here, we don't feel ourselves moving, and thus in this frame, we simply move parallel to the time axis. So, such world lines correspond to no travel through space. In contrast, instantaneous travel, which is the most extreme ftL possible, would go from the Earth to Vega with no time passing at all. Thus, it would appear as this pink line parallel to the space axis. Between those two extremes, we have traveling at the speed of light, given by this yellow line.
I mean, we also have the thing is, if you're going to be warping time, chances are you would want to warp it in such a way that you're going backwards in time, so that you actually meet Vega where you saw it be when you were looking at it. Instantaneous travel will simply mean that you end up at the area you saw it at, and it will still have moved since then, because it does move through space, as everything is moving throughout the galaxy, given enough time. Like, I don't know, 10,000 years?
In a Minkowski diagram like this, light always travels at 45-degree angles just like this, and technically is called a null line. Removing Vega for the moment, we first note that we are of course free to travel both forwards and backwards through space. However, if the speed of light is the cosmic speed limit, then any path below the null lines highlighted here are impossible to achieve. These would require ftL systems. On the other hand, lines above the null are perfectly accessible, such as this stationary world line that the Earth occupies.
Right.
A slower than light or ftL ship,
just taking any amount of time to move a distance, and you get this reference idea.
Would travel at some angle between that of a null and a stationary world line. Okay, congratulations, you've mastered the basics of space-time diagrams, but now let's go a little bit deeper and note some relationships and rules.
I mean, again, Cherenkov radiation, what's happening to light when it goes through water, and then you got objects that are moving faster than light is able to move, apparently. So, something is already able to move faster than light in water, simply because water is able to slow light down. I would stress that it takes more effort to move through water than regular atmosphere, so you would think that that same thing would have an even greater ftL once it's out of the water. But we don't observe that. That's not how it works for some reason. I don't know why.
That we'll need later. Stripping down this diagram, consider the Earth sat in space as shown here, and again working in the Earth's rest frame. From Earth's perspective, we don't feel like we're moving. That's relativity for you. So, as time progresses, our location in space is always the same, forming this world line. Crucially, that's the same as the time axis. In other words, the world line defines the time axis as perceived by those following it. This is important because we all know how relativity screws around with time, but here there's a clear definition of where the perceived time axis lives. Now, adding
Yeah, we're gonna ignore the orbiting of the Earth around the Sun and movement through the galaxy and the universe. Just ignore all that.
The null line back on, we can note the relationship that the space axis is really just a flip of the time.
Or let's just say that if we were to give all those values, the amount of space over time per allotment of time is, in comparison to C, it's a tiny sliver. So we might as well just say let's consider it resting.
Axis around the null.
It doesn't
So again,
change
this
very
provides
much.
a useful rule for orienting ourselves later when we'll have to deal with more complicated scenarios. Okay, so we're finally ready to start imagining ftL systems on here. Let's put Vega back on the diagram as a distant destination. Consider that at some distant location from Vega, but one closer to the Earth, a supernova goes off. We'll call it supernova X. The radiation from the supernova travels at the speed of light and thus follows a null line. Following this path, we can see that Earth sees X first and then Vega, marked by these stars. Now, imagine that Earth has an ftL messaging system. As soon as Earth sees X, we decide to send a warning to Vega. Recall that
This is, again, as I've explained in other videos, analogous to a thunderbolt and how you have, or a lightning bolt, and you have the sound hitting you after the light. But in this scenario, ftL, we're having the light and then the faster light. This, again, doesn't change the events of when the hell the bolt happened. In fact, it triangulates exactly when it happened.
ftL lines fall below the null, just like this, so we can see that Vega would learn of X before it actually sees it.
That doesn't mean anything because it's the same as you saw it and then you heard it. Big whoop-de-doo. You're not impressing me yet. Blah 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 blah. So you're an astronaut.
Mission accomplished. Now, remember I said earlier that the whole problem with ftL systems comes down to causality. So let's look at the order of events here to see if everything makes sense. For this, we need to work through time from the past to the future and try.
The convention of having time be like a diagonal line or whatever else. And ftL being faster than light. Just a concept. But you learn about a thing happening because of the message. It took a certain amount of time for that message to send through space, unless it's one of those instantaneous messages. So that would happen if you had one of the portals from Portal, because the distance between any two objects, like let's say going to the moon versus going somewhere else in the same room, there's no difference. The distance between two portals is 0 because the transportation through a portal is through a hyperdimensional type of extra dimension thing, such that regular dimensions all converge into a single point and then back again. So you can go from that point to, like, literally the idea of multiple dimensions is that you can go deeper and deeper and deeper which is just another layer and another layer and another layer, technically going smaller and smaller and infinitesimally smaller detail, yet also with portals the idea is that everywhere converges on one spot somehow. Nutty idea. Doesn't matter.
This sequence that occurs. We can do this by taking a slice through time, a simultaneous moment, and slide it up the screen from bottom to top, noting the sequence of events we see. And remember, I'm in Earth's reference frame here, so the time slices here are time as perceived by Earthlings, although this is also equivalent for Vegans too. So, sliding up the page, we can see that the first event is that supernova X occurs. Sliding further up, we can see that the next event is that Earth sees X and warns Vega. Going further, third, we see that Vega receives the warning. And once more, finally, we see that Vega sees X. Looking at the order, this seems sensible. Cause precedes effect. For example, supernova X happens, and then Earth sees X. Similarly, Earth warns Vega, then Vega receives the warning. Okay, so if you stopped the video here and walked away, please don't, you would erroneously conclude that ftL travel is fine. It doesn't break causality, cause precedes effect, there's nothing to worry about. Well, that's because in order to unveil the causality breaking power of ftL, we have to add another ingredient into the mix. We have to add a slower than light STL relativistic ship here, because doing so leads to some disturbing consequences. Okay, so coming back to our diagram, we currently have no STL ships on here, just Earth, Vega, X, and the ftL message shown in pink. STL ships have to follow world lines above the null, as shown here in red. Now, remember our rules from before. The world line defines the time axis as perceived by those following it. So, the time axis, as perceived by the crew of that ship, actually lives along that red line. It's not the same as the Earth's time axis in white. The distortion of time is one of those mind-bending consequences of special relativity, which our Journey to the End of the Universe video explores in much more depth. Now, remember rule number 2, that the space axis flips the time axis about the null line. So, as perceived by the crew, their space axis actually lives here. This is a remarkable consequence of Einstein's rule that the speed of light is the same for all observers. Time and space.
You're bastardizing Einstein, son. The speed of light is the same, for example, in a train versus outside. It doesn't matter how fast you go, you clock the speed of light as going the speed of light. Not the speed of light plus the train speed, but the speed of light. You don't clock it as going faster, because the train has nothing to do with the speed of light. Doesn't matter how fast the train is going, it doesn't change the fact that light will simply go at the speed of light. The only thing that can affect the speed of light is the atmosphere it's going through, which is either empty, as we have noticed, full of an atmosphere of air or whatever, or through glass or through water. So, unless the train was full of water, where light would start to go slower, you're not having any other difference between how you would measure light to be. So you would reference yourself as moving a certain speed, and light is just still going to be moving relative to zero, the speed of light. It's not the speed of light plus you, it's just and only the speed of light. So somehow people mix that up in their heads and they say, well, it's the same for every reference frame. So does that mean that a train that is going super fast, somehow, just imagine a scenario where you have two objects going super fast. One object is the train going ftL, and then light is supposed to try to keep up with it. According to his interpretation of what Einstein said, light would end up going ftL simply because the train is going ftL. Because it's light in the train. That's not what Einstein said. Einstein said light doesn't give a damn that it's in a train. It's going its speed. It is the speed of light versus a non-moving inertial observer. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter how fast you see it going. You're going to clock the speed of light as the same. You're going to see that it moves through the train at the same rate for the person on the ground as it is for the person in the train. There's no difference. Not even to the micron. The tiniest amounts that you can think of. Femto or whatever seconds. Nothing.
Bend to accommodate its constancy in all frames of reference. Recall before that we tracked this sequence of events with sliding time slices, lines of simultaneous moments. And recall that these slices must be parallel to the space axis. So, if we want to draw these time slices from the crew's perspective, they must be parallel to the red dashed line, sliding from the bottom right of the screen to the top left. So, coming back to the order of events, look, we already know what the Earthlings and the Vegans think happened, but what did the crew of the ship think? Using our sliding time slice, we can see that the first event in time, as perceived by the ship's crew, is that Vega receives the warning message from Earth about X. Going further, the second event is that supernova X happens. Third, we see that Earth sees X. And fourth and final, the Vegans see X. Looking at this order, we can immediately see something very strange. Vega received the warning message about X before Earth even sent it. How is that possible?
First of all, when did that ship leave Earth? And also, why is there this weird flipping of the entire time diagram? Because it's saying that for some reason there's this space axis. Like, you can't say that it's moving slower than light, and by this definition, also faster than light at the same time. Reality has one result. There is one speed that things go as they are traveling. It doesn't matter how many observers you put in there, they will be clocked going at a speed relative to a non-moving observer. Because you have to compensate for your speed in order to do an accurate measurement. This dotted line is completely useless, irrelevant. But there's so much wrong with this video.
Cause transpired after the effect. Causality is broken. At this point, you might wonder, maybe the problem isn't so much with ftL, but rather with the theory of relativity itself. What happens if we...
You gotta say that again? Yeah, there's something wrong with the theory of relativity. It's complete nonsense because light doesn't care that it's in a ship. It doesn't care if it's in a train. It simply will be moving at its speed. Again, unless it's in water or something.
Take away those ftL messages, because if causality violation persists even without ftL, then we would know that it's not ftL that's the problem, it's relativity. So let's repeat the experiment, but now I've removed that ftL message. Sliding our time slice along, we see that the first event is now supernova X. Next, the second event is that Earth sees X. And finally, the third event is that Vega sees X. So the sequence makes perfect sense now. No causality violation. Indeed, we get the same order as that which the Earthlings and Vegans would report. So the causality violation of before isn't a problem with relativity, it's a problem of ftL itself. Now you might say, so what? Does this disagreement about the order of events truly matter?
Look, I am besides the fact that I'm not actually keeping track with the whole reason why order of events based off some random dotted line that you designed, which makes literally no sense. I could go back to the reason for why you believe that or whatever. Events happen when they happen. It doesn't matter when the signal of the event happens. Events happen, the signal of it is sent at different speeds, doesn't matter. They'll get there when they get there. It doesn't make any difference if it takes faster than regular light to get there. It took a certain amount of time for it to get there. You'll learn about it after it happened. What?
Isn't this just an academic question, one with no real-world consequences? Well, I'm afraid not. Causality violation here is profound, and it can actually allow the crew to potentially break the universe. To see this, let's modify the scenario so the crew are no longer mere observers, but can actually intervene. Let's modify the ftL world line just a little. Instead of being sent to Vega, it is intercepted by the crew of the STL ship. So they would receive the message here. After receiving the message, they decide to send a reply back to Earth using an ftL transmitter that they have on board their ship. For a bit of perverse fun, let's imagine that they send a message back to Earth saying, "Turn off ftL transmitter." Okay, but where does this reply live on this space-time diagram? Bizarrely, it would follow a world line like this. Remember that...
No.
Our entire diagram is cast in Earth's frame of reference, and in this frame, the reply message seems to be traveling backwards through time. And now...
Listen. It's just a speed. It's literally just a speed. So let's put some numbers here. This original spot, let's say, is 10 minutes in. We send a signal, and for some reason it takes 1 minute for it to get there instead of normal, whatever it would take for light speed. We don't care. But it'll take another minute then, and Earth will have moved up in time. So it will take a total of 2, if it's instantaneous, to send the message back. No delay. Let's say that it took 30 seconds, who cares? If we say it takes 30 seconds, then it's a minute, 30 seconds, and then another minute, meaning a total of 2 minutes and 30 seconds has taken place in order to get that message to Earth to say, don't send another message. You're ridiculous.
Now we see the problem. The reply is received back on Earth before the message was ever sent. So Earth receives a message saying, turn off their...
Yeah, you basically did that out of your ass. You have no idea why you're not using good logic. You're just not. And I don't know where you got this idea from. But if I shoot a bullet, or if I have sound waves, or if I have a rocket ship going at Mach 10, or if I have light speed, or if I have whatever speed faster than light, it doesn't make any difference, because it will simply get there a certain amount of time after the original event happened. ftL doesn't at all mean a signal going back would then end up backwards in time. It just means it would take less time to get there, not negative time. So I don't know where you got this whole theory from, or this idea, but the problem is, and I'm not blaming you, not you specifically, I'm blaming everyone who believes in relativity, the way that it's misunderstanding how light doesn't give a damn if it's in a ship. It has a constant speed. Its light's speed is based off of light's ability to interact with the electromagnetic field to be bumping off of it in order to keep on moving forward, or however it actually moves. Light doesn't care that your ship is moving faster, although the particles are technically also moving faster. You would think that light would move faster also, but it doesn't. Light is a constant speed. So unless you're actually changing, the problem is people got in their idea that they are manipulating time the faster they go. This is not what was observed in the clock experiment. Two atomic clocks were sent on planes. One went, and a third clock just stayed at the station. One went around the Earth with the rotation of the Earth, and one went the other way, against the rotation of the Earth. When they arrived, there was a time discrepancy between the two clocks. The time discrepancy is referenced to the amount of distance that light actually traveled as it was going around is greater as you're going through with the rotation of the Earth, because the total amount, it's the same analogy as if you were to go forward on the train. As it is moving forward, your total distance is more, meaning light traveled a further distance in order to get bouncing back and forth in its little atomic clock. Going the opposite direction of travel, or the rotation of the Earth, is like if you move backwards on the train as the train moves forward. Now, you might not be moving backwards at the same rate, but by noticing that relationship, that you're going backwards, your total distance traveled is your speed, or negated from the speed of the train. So if you consider the rotation of the Earth, let's say that's 100 kilometers an hour for some stupid reason. It's not, but let's just pretend that it is. And you go backwards 10 kilometers an hour. Your total speed moving forward is 90. Is it not? It's like running backwards on a treadmill. The faster the treadmill's going, the less backwards you go, because you have to keep up with the speed of the treadmill. There's no difference. Treadmill or train, either way. So if your total distance has increased, that means it took longer for the light in the atomic clock to keep on bouncing. Longer bounces means that it would have had recorded less time. So it would have been behind by a certain amount. Going the opposite direction, it would have been ahead by a certain amount. And they made those predictions and they were off by like a little bit. So it doesn't matter if you're going a certain speed. It matters the total distance that light is traveling over time. Because light is consistent, your atomic clocks are faulty in the fact that the total distance needs to be considered, and if you're not compensating in regards of total distance. So the rotation of the Earth is one measurement type. If you were to consider the orbit of the Earth, that's a different amount of time. And if you go opposite the orbit of the Earth versus with the orbit of the Earth, When are you going to meet back with the Earth again? Two rockets go around the Earth, around the orbit of, on the same line as the orbit of the Earth goes. We'll say that. Same path. So, the Earth is here, you move forward, your speed has to keep up with the Earth, right? If you move the opposite direction, it'll take your speed plus the Earth's speed, and you'll get back to the Earth even faster. Total distance is changed depending which direction you go. That's not time dilation. That's your clock being inaccurate. You not using the proper scientific method. Coming to conclusions that are just random. And somehow resulting in you believing you go back in time. The fact that you can say a faster than light signal goes back in time, again, ignoring Cherenkov radiation completely, because it's an object moving faster than light in a water, it really doesn't make, obviously, light through empty space is supposed to have some extra special properties compared to light in water? Why? We'll know about the particles of light because they hit us before the light is able to get to us, because the particles literally get to us first. They went through water faster than the light did. Literally happens. Does that change when they were emitted? No. Did that change how they traveled through the space, which was water? No. Of course, the water wasn't moving.
Transmitter, and so they don't then send a message out subsequently. But if they never send out that message, then the ship will never receive it, and thus it will never reply. And thus Earth should not turn off its transmitters, etc., etc. Like killing our grandfather before we were born, we have set up now a grandfather paradox. Now, you might be wondering,
Simple grandfather paradox is, yeah, if you actually went back in time and prevented something from happening. That's it. You're not wrong in describing that. It's just that the method of ftL at a constant speed of double the speed of light is what it looks like, depending on the angle. I don't know. I don't care. Again, if it took 1 minute for light to get there, it'll take 30 seconds for this ftL signal to get there. And then 30 seconds later, you made the decision to send the signal back. And then 30 seconds later, your ftL signal actually went back. That's a total of 1 minute and 30 seconds. I know that I said 2 minutes and 30 seconds because I said that the signal took 1 minute to get that far. Who cares? I made your decision time still 30 seconds, so that's accurate or consistent.
perhaps there's something wrong with the lines that I drew here. The
Yes.
diagram is, after all, getting pretty complicated at this point. To simplify things and really nail this home, let's...
It's not complicated. This arrow is simple to follow. If you were to draw the signal beam back as a different shade of pink, that's fine, and the information wouldn't need to follow on arrows and everything. But again, the arrow should be pointing up this way, you dumbass. Which I have the permission to say that, because you're wrong about that. And that's all I will say.
Imagine that our ftL messages are not just faster than light, but they're instantaneous.
You realize that the direction a signal is sent, the light cone, proper terminology, is anything going in, say, this direction, has a speed that is relative to time and space in this direction. I don't know how you ended up with the line that you ended up with going downward for some stupid reason. Okay, your idea was that light, for some reason, for the ship, the moment you exit the ship, you enter into interstellar space. Light doesn't give a damn about what the hell is happening in the ship after that point. The time dilation would be negligible if it exists at all, and it doesn't.
Modifying this means that the original Earth message must be parallel to the space axis because no time transpires. And similarly, the reply must now be parallel to the STL ship's space axis, the red dashed line. And we can see that this simplified picture leads to...
I'm ignoring that entire thing. Because, one, I didn't pay attention to why you explained why that thing happened, so maybe I should look back. So it's 1834. Where did you get this started?
Right. But actually, the causality breaking is far more subtle and occurs even with FDR messaging systems alone. The explanation is systems falsifiable. It seems somewhat various ways. And of course, much this there's a reference so that as we move through time, it traces out this line. Note how it has the same position at all times. This line is what we would call the world line for Vega, and we don't have to limit ourselves to just Vega. We can, for example, put the Earth on the space-time diagram as well. Earth isn't moving much compared to Vega, so let's just assume it's also stationary in this frame and thus has a parallel world line. Since we're ultimately interested in speed when it comes to FTL, let's now familiarize ourselves with what speed looks like on this diagram. Because we're working in the Earth's rest frame here, we don't feel ourselves moving, and thus in this frame, we simply move parallel to the time axis. So, such world lines correspond to no travel through space. In contrast, instantaneous travel, which is the most extreme FDL possible, would go from the Earth to Vega with no time passing at all. Thus, it would appear as this pink line parallel to the space axis. Between those two extremes, we have traveling at the speed of light, given by this yellow line. In a Minkowski diagram like this, light always travels at 45-degree angles just like this, and technically is called a null line. Removing Vega for the moment, we first note that we...
Notice how he has, in this moment, that same diagonal line going in the opposite direction as if it's going that way through space. The diagonal line is still a relationship between space and time. It will have that amount of ratio. So you're aware of how normal objects, if moving at the speed of light, would normally go that way. And anything slower goes like this, and anything faster goes like this. So somehow, you mixed up everything and went like this, which is not how anything works. I'm gonna keep listening again for some stupid reason.
Are of course free to travel both forwards and backwards through space. However, if the speed of light
We're just assuming that there is only forward and backward in space. Forget about three dimensions, just for the example, and that's fine. I'm not bothered by that. I'm bothered by the fact that you forget how backwards works.
The cosmic speed limit, then
Through space, you're not going backwards through time. That's not even part of the diagram.
any path below the null lines highlighted here are impossible to achieve. These would require ftL systems. On the other hand, lines above the...
You realize if it is ftL, then you achieved it. And let's ignore the idea of impossible, but that doesn't come into effect. There's a whole other
null are perfectly accessible,
can of worms.
such as the stationary world line that the Earth occupies. A slower than light or ftL ship would travel at some angle between that of a null and a stationary world line.
Yeah.
Okay, congratulations, you've mastered the basics of space-time diagrams, but now let's go a little bit deeper and note some relationships and rules that we'll need later. Stripping down this diagram, consider the Earth sat in space as shown here, and again, working in the Earth's rest frame. From Earth's perspective, we don't feel like we're moving. That's relativity for you. So, as time progresses, our location in space is always the same, forming this world line. Crucially, that's the same as the time axis. In other words, the world line defines the time axis as perceived by those following it. This is
Yeah, I'm not moving on my chair, so I'm just moving through time. Who cares? It's okay.
important because we all know how relativity screws around with time, but here there's a clear definition of where the perceived time axis lives. Now, adding the null line back on, we can note the relationship that the space axis is really just a flip of the time axis around the null. So again, this provides a useful rule for orienting ourselves later when we'll have to deal with more complicated scenarios. Okay, so we're finally ready to start imagining ftL systems on here. Let's put Vega back on the diagram as a distant destination. Consider that at some distant location from Vega, but one closer to the Earth, a supernova goes off. We'll call it supernova X. The radiation from the supernova travels at the speed of light and thus follows a null line. Following this path, we can see that Earth sees X first, and then Vega, marked by these stars. Now imagine that Earth has an ftL messaging system. As soon as Earth sees X, we decide to send a warning to Vega. Recall that ftL lines fall below the null, just like this, so we can see that Vega would learn of X before it actually sees it. Mission accomplished. Now remember I said earlier the whole problem with ftL systems comes down to causality, so let's look at the order of events here to see if everything makes sense. For this, we need to work through time from the past to the future and track the sequence that occurs. We can do this by taking a slice through time, a simultaneous moment, and slide it up the screen from bottom to top, noting the sequence of events we see. And remember, I'm in Earth's reference frame here, so the time slices here are time as perceived by Earthlings, although this is also equivalent for Vegans too. So, sliding up the page, we can see that the first event is that supernova X occurs. Sliding further up, we can see the next event is that Earth sees X and warns Vega. Going further, third, we see that Vega receives the warning. And once more, finally, we see that Vega sees X. Looking at the order, this seems sensible. Cause precedes effect. For example, supernova X happens, and then Earth sees X. Similarly, Earth warns Vega, then Vega receives the warning. Okay, so if you stopped the video here and walked away, please don't, you would avoid ftL relativistic ship here, because doing so leads to some disturbing consequences. Okay, so coming back to our diagram, we currently have no ftL ships on here, just Earth, Vega, X, and the ftL message shown in pink. ftL ships have to follow world lines above the null, as shown here in red. Now, remember our rules from before. The world line...
Okay, so... Alright, so hold on.
Earth, Vega, X, and the ftL message shown in pink. ftL ships have to follow world lines above the null, as shown here in red. Now, remember our rules from before. The world line defines the time axis as perceived by those following it. So, the time axis, as perceived by the crew of that ship, actually lives along that red line. It's not the same as the Earth's time axis in white. The distortion of time is one of those mind-bending consequences of special relativity, which our journey to the end of the universe...
Is there a line that is white? I'm sorry, what? You're talking about the space axis? No, you're talking about the time axis, which is white, but Earth is in blue?
Video explores in much more depth. Now, remember rule number 2.
Okay, so the point is that the slower than light travel means that your world line is oriented that way, not 45-degree angle, but slightly above that, or whatever, more straight up than down, and whatever.
That the space axis flips the time axis about the null line. So, as perceived by the crew, their space axis actually lives here. This is a remarkable consequence of Einstein's rule that the speed of light is the same for all observers. Time and space bend to accommodate its constancy in all frames of reference. Recall before that we tracked the C.
No, I need it. I need something. I don't know. The problem is he didn't make this up. Someone else made this up. This whole thing about its space access. These pencils suck. You gotta put them in soup or something.
Sequence of events with sliding time slices, lines of simultaneous moments. And recall that these slices must be parallel to the space axis. So, if we want to draw these time slices from the crew's perspective, they must be
No. No. What happens when you're working in the ability to go in both directions? Huh? This is on the test. What happens when you have the ability to move in both directions? That means it's not about moving in parallel with the space. Also, the warping of space means, like, listen. No matter what, you're going upwards in time. So again, if you consider the cone, the moment that ship decides to go the opposite direction, Then the space axis has a different thing, and the relationship. Again, in order to change the space axis so you have the red line nonsense, and I'd repeat, it's nonsense to say that there should be some ship's space axis, because as far as the ship is concerned, as you're moving through space, and time, you have a relationship that is between space and time. Moving at this speed does not mean suddenly that space no longer, like, your own space. You haven't warped space. You're only going slower than the speed. It's the whole idea of whatever the hell this other dotted red line is, based on the first rule of the world line defines the space axis as perceived by those following it. What is that defines the time axis? Oh God, you're convoluted. You added some extra thing. And it's not, again, it's not, I don't even know who originally, I don't care who originally thought about it, you or someone else. I criticize equally. Okay? That's the equivalence principle. I criticize equally. The ship, like the signal, and this is a ship that's going slower than the speed of light, mind you, still has the same relationship to space as anything else. What is happening here? Is it somehow the space of the ship is changing? Your observations is that you are moving relative to actual cardinal directions through space. Simplified into forward and backwards through space. Instead of in all three dimensions, let's just say you go over there and you come back. That's perfectly fine, that's valid. But then somehow you got the idea that you're warping space as you're going slower than the speed of light. But you're not doing that for the signal that's going faster than the speed of light? It's this entire thing. No, you still have the same relationship of of the amount of time and the amount of actual space that you traveled. The ship's space line is imaginary. It's ridiculous. And it's dumb. The ship's timeline is imaginary. That is not how that works. It's a relation. Its speed is the relationship between space and time. You don't define that as its world line or whatever.
For all observers, time and space bend to accommodate its constancy in all frames of reference. Recall before that we tracked this sequence of events with sliding time slices, lines of simultaneous moments.
Look, let's take a step back and think about, again, I've already said this. What happens if you have light going through the entirety of the cosmos? How many measurement distortions are we expected to calculate when we have light going from 13 billion light years away, with all the different galaxies between us and them? How many other weird distortions are expected to happen? Does it change when those events actually took place because it took less time for light to get to us? No, we understand light and we measure it as going a constant, regular, 100% the same speed through space no matter what direction, as long as it's not going through a different medium like water or glass or atmosphere. So anytime that it bumps into an atmosphere, sure, lensing can happen, but that's bumping through an atmosphere. But regular space is a lot of empty space. We take all of that other stuff and we say a lot of nothing actually took place, and there is no weird time manipulative properties for light. This is nonsense.
And recall that these slices must be parallel to the space axis. So, if we want to
the true space axis, it's not about parallel to space. It's about moving forward through time. The diagonal thing means you're moving through time and space simultaneously. Both of them. You're not only moving through time when you're moving through time and space, but that's what you're describing. That you're only moving through time when you're moving through time and space. Clearly you have traveled to Vega. You have moved through space. If anything, the time that you're moving up, you should be moving up this way as time moves up. If that makes any sense whatsoever. This line is irrelevant. It's not about moving versus space. It has to do with moving through time. So dumb.
draw these time slices from the crew's perspective.
So if you diagonal it, then if you do it the way I'm talking about, then you mention, oh, he moved through here, he saw this first, then he saw that, eventually, light already got there, because he got... What the fuck? This diagram's all sorts of nonsense. Imagine... Okay. He left before... At some random point, irrelevant of everything else, right? So some reason his idea is that light, right, it matches here. And where the fuck is my bubble? And then he goes up. He takes his sweet ass time before he ever sees. Takes a little extra time for him to see that explosion happening. It wasn't in his light cone until he got here. You're nonsense.
Perspective, they must be parallel to the red dashed line,
No.
sliding from the bottom right of the screen to the top left.
That's not how time works.
Coming back to the order of events, look, we already know what the Earthlings and the Vegans think happen, but what did the crew of the ship think? Using our sliding time slice, we can see that the first event in time, as perceived by the ship's crew, is that Vega receives the warning message from Earth about X. Going further, the second event is that supernova X happens.
Based on someone
Third,
else's
we see that
perspective.
Earth sees X.
It's wrong.
And fourth and final, the Vegans see X. Looking at this order, we can immediately see something very strange. Vega received the warning message about X before Earth even sent it. How is that possible? Cause transpired after the effect. Causality is broken. At this point, you might wonder, maybe the problem isn't so much with ftL, but rather with the theory of relativity itself. What happens if we take away those ftL messages? Because if causality violation persists even without ftL, then we would know that it's not ftL that's the problem, it's relativity. So let's repeat the experiment, but now I've removed that ftL message. Sliding our time slice along, we see that the first event is now supernova X. Next, the second event is that Earth sees X. And finally, the third event is that Vega sees X. So the sequence makes perfect sense now. No causality violation.
Again, moving upward in time has nothing to do. There's no reason to. There's the dotted red line saying, "Oh, it's the ship's space axis." There is no ship's space axis. That's imaginary. It's nonsense. It's irrelevant. It is a thought experiment idea, but doesn't actually happen and is referencing nothing.
Indeed, we get the same order as that which the Earthlings and Vegans would report. So the causality violation of before isn't a problem with relativity, it's a problem of ftL itself. Now you might say, so what? Does this...
So you're... okay. The one thing I'll give you is, if everything that you've said checks out, then yeah, ftL would break causality technically. But that's not how space and time works. You don't change the relationship of how you move through time. You're still moving through time, you're just also moving through space. I don't like these pencils.
Disagreement about the order of events truly matter? Isn't this just an academic question, one with no real-world consequences?
Well, the truth is that if you have, let's example, an actual correct timepiece, you'll never make one at this rate. Look, an atomic timepiece might be very accurate, but it's completely wrong when it starts moving. It's called the moving target problem because you're literally moving where it is that you're sending the light towards. The target has moved. Therefore, it'll take a longer time for the light to actually get there, or less, if you go slower, or something. And the time will tick at a different rate than it's supposed to, because it's subject to that. And it's a stupid clock. The atomic clock is a stupid clock. Its vulnerability of moving through space makes it stupid, ill-advised. I don't know who originally thought of the atomic clock and thinks that if you're moving through space and you don't compensate for your speed, apparently it's perfectly fine to say there's time dilation distortions. But that doesn't happen. As we saw in going around the Earth, you go one direction and time has apparently sped up or happened sooner than it would, and it happened later than it would for the other clock. But reality hasn't changed. The stationary clock hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is the amount of distance light had to travel during those trips. And that's the thing, it's this misunderstanding that drives their entire idea. But then you got the space-time diagram with some stupid idea of the changing of the definition of what it is to go through space. That is not how moving through space-time works. And it's not about moving parallel to... It's dumb.
Well, I'm afraid not. Causality violation here is profound, and it can actually allow the crew to potentially break the universe. To see this, let's modify the scenario so that the crew are no longer mere observers, but can actually intervene. Let's modify the ftL world line just a little. Instead of being sent to Vega, it is intercepted by the crew of the STL ship. So they would receive the message here. After receiving the message, they decide to send a reply back to Earth using an ftL transmitter that they have on board their ship.
If the signal was instantaneous, again, imagine a dot here where the time has actually passed. They've actually gotten there already. So they boop, it's there. It still took the travel time of the original message, an instantaneous message. Let's say it took 30 seconds to get there and instantaneous to get there. There's a time gap of 30 seconds. If it took 30 seconds to get here, you waited 30 seconds, then you sent the message, it goes boop, up here. Not down. Never down. Your movement through space and time isn't the same as you saying you are moving stationary. It's just not. Because you're not stationary, you're moving.
For a bit of perverse fun, let's imagine that they send a message back to Earth saying, turn off ftL transmitter. Okay, but where does this
The perversion lies deeper than you know.
reply live on this space-time diagram? Bizarrely, it would follow a world line like this. Remember that our entire
Literally, the definition is it takes a certain amount of time for the signal to send. Not a negative amount of time for the signal to send. Faster than light plus slower than light equals somehow negative. Time through space. If faster than light is 10 meters per second, it's not, but let's say it is, and slower than light is 1 meter per second, right? You end up with 11 meters. That's not the right way to frame it. You would say if faster than light takes 10 seconds to go through 1 meter, and slower than light takes 5 seconds to go through 1 meter, first of all, you're moving away from the signal as you are traveling at any speed. So light has to keep up in order to get to you. We're not even talking about that in this. And then pretending that the Earth isn't moving through space. I don't care, that's not a problem. I have no problem with that for some reason. I really don't care. But it is moving through time.
Higher diagram is cast in Earth's frame of reference, and in this frame, the reply message seems to be traveling backwards through time. And now we see the problem. The reply is received back on Earth before the message was ever sent. So Earth receives a message saying, turn off their transmitter.
Hold on, stop.
And now we see the problem.
So here's what I'm getting, is that you sent it backwards along the space line with the idea of it being wait, what? How did you get that angle in the first place? Again, the moment that you send the signal to going back, it's as if you're not moving. Because there's only one moment when it was sent. It wasn't sent through your entire trip. Your speed is irrelevant to that signal. If that makes any sense. For example, as I am running, when I throw the ball, I may keep running, but my position of where I threw the ball doesn't change. And it doesn't change the trajectory of the ball, where it's going to land. My motion is irrelevant to the motion of the ball. But the idea of inertia and inertial frame of reference is that your inertia, your momentum through space, is carried along. So that even if you're moving in one direction, through the back streets, even if you're moving through one direction, you and the ball have some momentum, and for some reason you have to fire it backwards with a certain amount of force or whatever else. But the point is that the ball reaches its own speed based on how hard you tossed it or whatever. It still takes a certain amount of time to get there. Again, the relationship between space and time is supposed to be a 45-degree angle. Notice how these time and space lines for the ship are not 45-degree angles, even though they're going slower than the speed of light. It's a badly thought out experimental theoretical.
The reply is received back on Earth before the message was ever sent. So Earth receives a message saying, turn off their transmitter, and so they don't then send a message out subsequently. But if they never send out that message, then the ship will never receive it, and thus it will never reply. And thus Earth should not turn off its transmitters.
Let me explain this to you in dumb words. The protocol is to send the message. We know that you told us not to. It doesn't mean that we actually won't. The protocol is to send the message. Turning off the transmitter, yeah, we might do that after we send our message, which is what we planned on doing. There's no reason for us to, even what we would observe is that we would understand that if you're sending if any of this was true, we would understand that message delay is somehow backwards, so that your message is we hear from you even though you're moving away from us and sending a signal that also has a speed, a regular speed, which has a relation to time, not the ship's time, nothing to do with that. But the problem probably is, again, it's an oversimplification. It's a bastardization of how things are actually understood back then, where, again, light doesn't care unless you're moving through a fluid or whatever.
Etc., etc. Like killing our grandfather before we were born, we have set up now a grandfather paradox. Now, you might be wondering, perhaps there's something wrong with the lines that I drew here. The diagram is, after all, getting pretty complicated at this point. To simplify things and really nail this home, let's imagine that our ftL messages are not just faster than light, but they're instantaneous. Modifying this means that the original Earth message must be parallel to the space axis because no time transpires. And similarly, the reply must now be parallel to the SDR ship's space axis, the red dashed line. And we can see that this simplified picture leads to exactly the same result, albeit one that's even more extreme. So the causality violation isn't some mere academic issue here. It opens the door to time travel paradoxes. And remember that...
Wait, go back. What the fuck?
The diagram is, after all, getting pretty complicated at this point. To simplify things and really nail this home, let's imagine that our ftL messages are not just faster than light, but they're instantaneous.
The question is, are they instantaneous in reference to the ship's space-time line? In which case, if it's instantaneous and the slower than light ship timeline is this way, but for some reason instantaneous means that the signal is being sent relative to now regular time and space, not ship time and space. Funny how your entire thing just erupts into absurdity because you then ignore this whole stupid line that you made. Because if it is instantaneous based off of its space line, which again, you gotta admit you're just delusional and imagining and not keeping track of and not being consistent with it. The idea of instantaneous would be it goes down following this stupid diagonal line with dotted diagonal line, which is irrelevant. But if it was instantaneous, it would follow that line, covering space and no time. No space, ship time. No space, actual time. Just space of time. Still would end up actually sooner than your original estimate. That's what instantaneous means. So what you've done is you said that the signal went back in time when in fact it went slower than instantaneous. It's easy to get mixed up about diagrams like this, but it's laughable that if an instantaneous diagram line, literally, if you trace it, it falls underneath the pink line. Because that's the angle it's following, according to your idea of the ship's space line. But you made it accurate to actual space, actual time, which means you're not going along with your own tropes, your own ideas of what's happening.
Modifying this means that the original Earth message.
Never mind, you adjusted it. Shut up. Yeah, it ends up lower. I will never understand why you think the slower than light has some extra special relationship through space. Different than actual space. It's like length contraction or something was applied. You didn't mention. I don't care. This is dumb.
Must be parallel to the space axis because no time transpires. And similarly, the reply must now be parallel to the SDL ship's space axis, the red dashed line. And we can see that this
Okay, so I was wrong. He went according to his thing, blah blah blah.
simplified picture leads to exactly the same result, albeit one that's even more extreme. So the causality violation isn't some mere academic issue here. It opens the door to time travel paradoxes. And remember that we didn't assume any.
Again, idea of instantaneous, you're still moving through actual space. The ship's space timeline is, or the ship's space line was imaginary, relevant, and dumb. Somehow referencing that you're going through some other amount of space. Instantaneous means instantaneous. Through actual space. Going slower than light. But somehow you're trying to say that you have warped space. And again, the idea of instantaneous, it obviously would be silly to say that it even mentions there's a difference between the diagonal line that is aligned with the ftL ship's space axis. Again, it's imaginary, it's dumb. That line is longer for some reason that's very obvious than moving through actual space as a normal signal would do. Again, once the signal leaves the ship, it enters normal space. The signal doesn't travel along ftL space line. ftL space line doesn't even exist. Specific time does not, no, none of this. Just none of this.
Space axis. There also have a time travel machine, a machine capable of creating paradoxes in time. In one of my personal favorites, we tackled time travel in a previous video, along with the paradoxes that it elicits. Physicists despise problems like the grandfather paradox because,
says you,
they undermine the logical underpinnings of our universe, and no good solution exists to resolve them. It was the
whole idea of, oh god, you invoked Stephen Hawking. Oh crap, I have to listen to this.
Stephen Hawking who posed the most accepted way out. Put simply, time paradoxes are not possible. Hawking's famous chronology protection conjecture suggests that the laws of nature are arranged in such a way that time paradoxes simply cannot happen. Whenever you try, some physical effect will prevent you from achieving that goal. What?
Or the other alternative to that is that you were part of the mechanism the whole time. If I go back in time and then shoot my grandfather, it wasn't my grandfather, but it was in fact maybe someone else, and my grandma had an affair. I still end up being born. Then it wouldn't be the grandfather paradox. You just did something random back in time. The problem with time paradoxes and all that stuff is due for another day. It's overreaching.
What might this look like for an ftL system then? So just for example, the Alcubierre drive that we discussed earlier. How is it that Hawking is going to somehow save us here? Well, it turns out that in that case, Hawking himself may have already done so in his previous work. Because recall that one of the problems with the Alcubierre drive is that they generate enormous amounts of radiation inside the bubble. What kind of
Why?
radiation? Well, it's Hawking radiation. That radiation, in fact, builds up exponentially and rapidly destabilizes the bubble. Crucially,
It's physical energy or matter. It's a bubble of space-time. It's the same thing as saying I farted and that distorts the bubble, or I breathed on it and it distorts the. What are you talking about? More nonsense.
Hawking radiation is a quantum effect, and recall that a
Never mind.
unified theory of quantum mechanics and gravity so far eludes us. So even though we don't truly understand how quantum effects and gravity play together, Hawking's chronology protection conjecture essentially argues that it's in that missing knowledge that the answer lies. That one day we will discover a unified theory that neatly explains why time travel paradoxes can never happen, and thus why ftL systems too are not allowed. I promised you something definitive about ftL, and now we have it. Unfettered use of ftL systems can break causality and cause paradoxes. Hawking predicts that such violations are impossible, and so by that logic, does that mean that ftL is...
That is such a. Oh yeah, I didn't eat my cereal today because I told myself not to. I ate lunch instead.
is in turn impossible? Not quite. One way that we might be able to salvage ftL and satisfy Hawking is to consider that, hey, ftL is possible, it's just that there are strict rules about its use. After all, when we removed the STL ship from our space-time diagram, there were no violations of causality, or even more subtly, just demanding...
Look, the STL ship is fine. It's the fact that you made some weird slower than light timeline that's like, oh, it's got its own what? No.
The ship never intervenes leads to no paradoxes. Perhaps ftL systems are possible, but somehow specific paradox-causing activities like
That's a clone.
replying to that original ftL message are forbidden. This sounds a little contrived, but it provides at least a possible way out for ftL. The other option is just to reject Hawking's conjecture outright, to suppose that paradoxes are allowed and deal with the enormously challenging consequences of making sense of the universe with their inclusion. As hard as a pill as it is to swallow, we have to accept that ftL systems have fundamental problems here that go beyond engineering or energetics. But remember, exploration of the galaxy is not impossible without ftL, it just takes a lot longer.
Look. If you have ftL, let's say that it took you 2 seconds to get somewhere. You went through space and time. It'll take you a certain amount of time to think about what happened when you got there, maybe. And then you'll send another signal, possibly at ftL speeds. It will arrive greater than 2 seconds. I don't give a damn for any of this, because it's not based on real science. It's based on conjecture and thoughts that are like, the problem is, it's based on a misunderstanding about how light actually works, what people were actually talking about back then, and for some reason, either that or Einstein was just wrong and people are misunderstanding reality because he misled us. I'd rather simply say you're misunderstanding what the hell he said. And that's more acceptable by everybody. Puts the blame on everyone else instead of someone we care about, like Einstein. But the problem is, you shouldn't care if Einstein is wrong or not. I can be wrong. I'm fine with admitting if I'm wrong about anything. I have multiple times explained the plane situation, and I stated one way or another that time was either added or removed. And if I know what I'm actually talking about, if I remembered the experiment as it was described, and also what actually would have happened, it all checks out, and I would say it correctly. But it's irrelevant if I say it correctly, because I'm not wrong about the why it actually has a positive or negative value versus the standing clock that just sits there at the station. The one that moves through time and space along with the train, along with the rotation of the Earth. That clock, it was a plane, whatever. That clock experienced a greater amount of distance over time. The other clock experienced less distance over time. The difference in the distance makes for the amount of ticks that would happen. It would take less time for the light to travel the less distance, obviously, so it would have ticked faster. So it would be ahead of the clock. It would show that like a couple extra nanoseconds have taken place when they haven't. The other clock took longer to do those distances. It would be behind. And I don't care if I said it wrong a previous time. The point is, it's because of the distance, not because of time dilation. The distance it traveled is what matters and is important to keep in track. This entire video it's annoying that if you look at something that Einstein said and you simply say he was a genius, he could never have been wrong, you're not doing a service to the scientific method if you do that. The scientific method is you must be subjective. It doesn't matter if someone is right or wrong. We are always learning about everything. And it is the point that we will make mistakes, misunderstand things, and in the future we'll have a better understanding because of better measurements, better insights, or less pressure about war or whatever else. There was once a time when we thought that the Earth went and had the sun going around it. But then we figured out, no, That's not how it works. Mars in retrograde and all that shit. That's based off of outdated information. We then thought that planets orbit the sun, but in circles. We learned that it's not circles, it's ovals. It's also not ovals, it's wobbly ovals. Same as we go around the galaxy, it's a wobbly orbit around the galaxy with the entire solar system. We're learning all the time, and there's nothing wrong with being mistaken about an issue that is so basic or any detail whatsoever. People were wrong about the double slit experiment, and they are continuously wrong all the time, but I have said it correctly, that the electromagnetic field goes ahead of the electron. It makes the interference pattern as it, the ripple of the EM field itself, is what goes through the slits and makes the interference pattern interfering with itself. The electrons are just along for the ride. They end up in the low pressure zones of the interference pattern, piling up where they might be based on that. Totally predictable for anyone who's actually using their head. The scientific method is about, yeah, we don't have all the information. We never are going to assume we had all the information, especially 10 years ago, much less 50. We have better equipment. We have better experience with things. People for 100 years thought that Stirling engines work, and they said it. Even Bill Nye, more recently, and he's supposed to be thinking for himself how a Stirling engine works, he said, and everyone who's a hobbyist or someone who's serious about it, there's a Stirling engine society. They all would say they are sure that the top plate must be hot and the bottom plate must be cold, and it's the difference between the top and the bottom plate of the chamber of the Stirling engine that makes some weird weather system inside of it. And that's not how Stirling engines work. Stirling engines work because they intake air, first of all. The air from the outside is of a regular pressure and temperature. As it goes into the chamber, it increases in temperature and then pressure and forces out and repeats. Or it decreases in temperature and contracts and repeats for constant motion. It's nothing to do, and it could be that, yeah, maybe you can optimize it with the bottom plate being one temperature and the top being a different temperature, but that's not the function of how it works. It's about the outside air and its pressure versus the inside air and its pressure, because it's the pressure difference that makes the contraction with the cold or the expansion with the hot that makes the force of the piston in the first place. There is no change of temperature within the chamber other than that. It's not a weather system that is cycling between hot and cold in the chamber. All the cold is outside the chamber, or all the hot is outside the chamber and it gets cold in the chamber. That's how it works. It changes from the outside to the inside. From hot outside, cold inside, or cold outside and hot inside. That's how it works, because that's where the heat is applied. That's where the cold is applied. Depending on which one of them you have going. And you can have both formats. Bill 9 did do one thing correct. He said, and it blew my mind, that of course, if you have the Stirling engine on extra cold ice, then the outside normal air pressure is going to contract. And it's the difference between these pressures that runs the machine. It's the amount of the transformation from the outside to the inside pressure that is the force that drives it. So if you have multiple of these, and inside-outside interchange, then you can constantly be making hot on one side, and it will give a force, and you can be making cold on the other side, and it will give a force, but those are two separate chambers. And then there's a flow between them. There's a difference between all of that. And what they said was it all happens in the one chamber. That's not where it happens. Knowing that, it doesn't change the fact that they can understand that the more heat you apply to the damn kettle, the more steam comes out. Similarly, you can do the same with air, and the air will go out. No steam required. People are dead wrong about the electron. They think it acts like a wave. No, it is not the thing that acts like a wave. It's the EM field that acts like the wave, and the electron is on for the ride. And I know that somebody said in the comment responding to one of the things that I've said that I'm dumb. They literally... The problem is, they don't realize what they don't know. Because I said you can control neutrons with sound. For anyone who doesn't know, acoustic levitation is where you take sound and you hold stuff with it, like liquid. Protons, neutrons, electrons, all of them are held in that liquid, because that's what makes water, or styrofoam balls, or whatever you're holding, grains of sand. And the more intense you make the sound, the higher fidelity you can make, then, and like the more tiny the vibrations are, higher frequencies, mean you can possibly control neutrons with sound. I need a drink. I'm sorry, maybe there's some way that pressure waves have nothing to do with... He said that pressure waves, sound waves, have to do with electricity? I'm not doing a damn thing with electricity when I snap my fingers, or I move my vocal cords. Sound isn't about electricity or the specific thing he said, and I don't know. I can't figure it out. This guy may be dense. The fact that he goes on to insult me doesn't help. But I tell you, very important, sound on the order of a nuclear explosion. So what? Absolutely. So what? That's intensity. That's amplitude. That's not frequency. What the hell? You don't need to have amplitude to control things with sound. You need frequency. Frequency is how much it waves back and forth. Amplitude is the whole thing instead of just one thing. It's thicker. The amplitude of a nuclear explosion sound, yeah, that's big. I'm talking about something that is fast, rapid, and small. The exact opposite of a nuclear explosion. Repulsion between electrons. No. The reason... Okay, listen. The only reason why anything vibrates with sound and whatever else is with electrostatic repulsion between electrons. So you're saying that the ideas of pressure waves and whatever else can't work on physical matter. Just on its own. I don't believe that. And it doesn't matter. I said focused standing waves hold neutrons. My language was precise. You can use sound to hold neutrons or force-carrying waves. Notice how he didn't respond to my second response. Or the last response. Neutrons held by protons in atoms. Form three types of pressure waves: sound, magnetic, and gravity. This is true. All pressure waves. The thing is, we say we don't understand the dynamic of gravity waves. That's because we're not thinking about the electromagnetic field in relation to large objects instead of the relationship between electrons and everything. The EM field permeates everything. It flows through everything. It connects everything. So when you bump around it, it's like you're bumping the tablecloth. Literally, practically. Not actually the fabric of space-time, but it is the thing that is transmitting the gravitational waves you noticed. We all saw in the laser interferometry, whatever, LiDAR system. That L-shaped laser sensor. So yeah, again, the problem is I'm not speaking nonsense. It's people talking about relativity who are speaking nonsense. Time dilation to the curvature of space-time. These are ideas that are noticing issues and attempting to give the best result that you can give. And again, it doesn't matter if it's time of war or not. You should have good science, but you can only communicate as best as you can at the time. You can only do measurements as good as you can at the time. People are always wanting and getting a new, fresh perspective, and then you got Schrodinger's equation, which can maybe explain the chances of you seeing an electron at any given space. But if you had a sensor that was a quadrillion frames a second, you'd be able to see where the electron is. You wouldn't have to use an equation. You'd actually know where it is at that instantaneous moment, that imperceptible moment of time, because it was a fraction of a trillionth of a second of time. And you noticed it was there. So you can maybe then predict where it will be next, based off of the rate of its rotation around the atom. And if your stuff is as accurate as a quadrillionth of a second, you'll actually hit the damn thing. But as I've shown in other videos with that picture that I love so much, that amazing picture where you see the electron as a bunch of dots around the atom, that picture is awesome because it shows you that it's all these different echoes, but it's just one electron. Just one. Because it goes around the atom about 5 quadrillion times per second, based on the speed of 2.2 thousand kilometers per second, or 2.2 million meters per second, or 22 quadrillion atomic widths per second, if an atomic width is a tenth of a nanometer. That's how I get those numbers. I don't... The problem is I can't be... Ignoring science communicators. Oh my god, there's a... Ask me anything that's not important to react to, but I will watch, and if he says anything that's wrong, I will react to it. I don't care if I repeat what I've said before. Something Atlas. What the fuck are you talking about? New interstellar propulsion method. Taurus. Okay. Well, science could save Earth from asteroids. I will not care to respond to that. Defense of science. Shocking result from studs cosmology. Okay, sure. Quantum immortality. The strangest idea. Yeah, that's dumb. You realize that every instant that has gone by of me talking about things or whatever, there has been the chance that one thing happens or another thing happens. And of all the different possible ways that it can play out, it's innumerable. So, alternate realities would be infinite. Just based on everything that occurs about me in 1 minute. And then there's all sorts of other things that are involved in reality. It's not just one electron that decides to be spin up or spin down or whatever. It's literally countless, like 10 to the 1,000 alternate universes is not even close to the correct number. It's a stupidly high number of every particle in the universe, every interaction between particles, every individual, including every bug, every bacteria, every krill, every whatever. There's more krill in the world than there are humans. It's a lot of krill. I'm tired. Oh, and please note, Veritasium and their talk about some spring. I need to subscribe to this because I gotta figure out. Like, anytime. The problem is, anytime that they say something right, I don't mention that. I don't respond to that. And I should. Because all I do is nitpick about all the stuff you get wrong. Every single thing you always get wrong. I would love to talk about things that are accurate to reality. But with those things, I don't need to put in my input. It's already accurate. The reason my input would be any use to anything is it actually would make a change in how life proceeds from then on. And if that means that someone makes an example or an experiment or whatever that leads to something that actually works and is amazing and stuff. Like acoustic levitation. That is amazing. We've also seen videos about people who have stopped fire with sound. It's not so much sound as they stop fire with the standing waves, which means there is an area of space that is wobbling such that air isn't able to get into that space or out and allow, like, it basically is suffocating the fire. So once all the air is used up in that area, no more air goes in, and then the fire is put out. You could make a system of homes that every home has the ability with speakers to put out every fire that ever could happen without you needing to do anything. It would just sense the fact that the fire is there, because you'd have more than just basic sensors. You'd have like a thermal sensor to know when an exceeding amount of heat made by possibly the imprint of a fire. You'd also have the ability to actually see, like, the spectrum and the wispiness of fire through a camera. You'd send a signal that'd be oscillating, and it would change. It would be directed in such a way that it would actually put out the candle for you. It would put out the stove for you. It would put out the goddamn entire room for you. That kind of thing with firefighters, imagine not needing water anymore. You just put an emitter out and it sends this constant fluctuating wave of sound. No one can hear it except for dogs and stuff. And suddenly, like, maybe your ear's bleeding, but this fire is immediately put out everywhere. No water needed, no hours of fire damage and inhalation problems. It's all arrested, which also means there's no air for anyone. But it's like that's also only bad if you're not equipped with something to help you breathe. Like maybe even just a water bottle is enough extra air that you'll be fine for a little bit. And people have pop bottles all the time. You could just have some pop bottle that you'd be able to have the air from for a little bit or something. I think the standard idea is to use like a wet rag because the water captures the smoke but lets the air through somehow. I don't really know how that works. How it lets the air through and not the smoke. But it's less smoke, I think, is the key about that. Because if we have clocks that are compensating for speed, we would be able to have clocks in whatever space vehicles like satellites or spaceships or astronaut suits that will compensate for their speed and know correct time. And then that can inform them about things like when to do a thruster maneuver instead of being off by like a certain amount of time or whatever. I don't like this video. I can't not explain just how dumb it seems that you would assume somehow that by moving slower than the speed of light, you are changing your space-time diagram. Like your relationship between you and space. That's not how it works. I'm going to bed.